Hey guys, it's April with part 2 of label reading, and this is where we get to the nitty-gritty to really be able to talk about proteins, fats, carbohydrates, cholesterol, sodium, those other key factors that are on a label that you want to be, looking out for, and what really should you be looking out for. A lot of times people have to unlearn as much as they're trying to learn about what we're now looking for in a label now that you're eating clean, and that you're also concerned about the glycemic impact totally of the foods to make sure that you're staying in fat burning mode. So let's look. We've already talked about calories and serving sizes and a few little pieces about the ingredient list. What I want to talk about first is, as you see protein, we already know 18 to 25 grams per serving would be sort of optimal for a main meal, and maybe less than that, 7 to 15 or something like that for a snack, which is great. So when you're looking at a label, that's important to note. Now, when we talk about grains, we will also cover the fact that protein doesn't mean that it's a complete protein. So if you're looking at something that is a nut, a seed, a legume, a bean, or a grain, when you see what the protein content is, or even protein that's on vegetables, they're all great, but they're not complete. So if you are a vegetarian, that's something that you're going to have to be a little bit more careful about. But even for everybody else, just don't think that if you're eating non-complete sources that are, let's say, non-animal meat or fish sources, that they're going to be complete. They're not. And there's specific ways that you have to combine them if you wanted to make that your main source. All right, so next we're going to talk about fat. Now, fat is not making us fat, and we already know that, you've heard in the past saturated versus unsaturated fat. Well, saturated fat and unsaturated fat, the only difference is that one of them is liquid at room temperature, a la unsaturated fats like olive oil. Butter is a good example. At room temperature is solid. Now, there's certain degrees of unsaturated fat, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not good for you if they're saturated. Look at coconut oil as a really good example, as well as ghee. They can have a lot of health properties, and your ancestors ate a lot of saturated fat. They had some sort of atherosclerosis, if you will, but that's not what people were dying of, okay? So what's more important is that we stay trans fat free. When you look at hydrogenated oils, that's really the big kicker. And we're going to cover that a little bit more when we get into fats. But what I want you to look for in the ingredient list for trans fats are things that say hydrogenated oil, modified or fractionated oil, or even partially hydrogenated oils. These are so dangerous because they really create lesions in your arteries and sort of nooks and crannies where fat is going to deposit, and it really compromises the integrity of your arteries and your circulatory system. So those really wreak havoc, and actually the FDA allows companies to say that they're trans fat free and still allow 0.5 grams per serving. So if you're feeding your family, something that says it's trans fat free, but there really is 0.5 grams per serving, by the time they finish the box of whatever it is, they've actually consumed quite a bit of trans fats. So as you've heard me say earlier, aspartame is a no-no in our house from a sugar standpoint. And when we're talking about fats, for us, trans fats are the other one that are an absolute no, as well as high fructose corn syrup. So that's a little bit about fat, and we already talked about the rule of 5. So if you're looking for dressings and things like that, that's just a good way to go. But understanding that, guacamole, avocado, olive oil are all high in fat, we don't have to worry as much about that. Remember, when we're talking about label reading, we're not talking about all the clean veggies and fruits and fish and things that we've been eating. We're now talking about things that are more processed, packaged, and that we have to be a bit more careful because they're actually carrying a label. Always safer if you eat as many things as you can that really don't require a label. Next is carbohydrates, and this is the big one, because if we're looking at cholesterol, cholesterol is a type of fat, and cholesterol is not what's increasing your cholesterol, sugar is, right? So that's where net carbohydrates are actually going to come into play. And for us, if you look at a label and you see total carbohydrates, you'll see that in bold, and then indented from that on a label, you'll see any of the possible things that would be considered carbohydrates. There's up to 5. So those would include sugar alcohols, fiber, glycerin, and other or miscellaneous carbohydrates, okay? So are we concerned with the total carbohydrates? Only as far as it's going to impact our blood sugar. So I want you to think of total carbohydrates and net carbohydrates as gross and net pay. You know that you get a certain amount in your gross pay for work, but the net pay is the one that actually affects your bank account. And that's the same with net carbohydrates. We have total carbohydrates, but we have the net carbohydrates that are actually affecting your blood sugar. And that's what you want to be concerned about, because as soon as you spike your blood sugar and you have something that has a huge impact or a high glycemic impact on you, then you're going to be really kind of spun into that fat burning mode, and it's not going to matter if you eat a plate of broccoli. Guess what you're going to store it as, right? So here's the formula, and I will definitely post it. Total carbohydrates minus, so you're subtracting out from that, any of the things that don't affect your blood sugar. Those would include fiber and sugar alcohol, because neither of those actually affect your blood sugar. So when you subtract those out, what you're left with is a net carbohydrate. If you purchase the TLS Guide and Journal, then you will see that there's a page where we actually post what a label should look like, and a couple of key tips and tricks when you're looking at some of the different things. It's better explained. I will certainly post so that you can have that formula that I just put there. But take a look at a bar, take a look at oatmeal, take a look at Cheerios. If you see that Cheerios has 36 grams of total carbohydrates and only 1 gram of fiber and no sugar, it doesn't matter that it's no sugar. It doesn't matter it's low calorie, and it doesn't matter that that it's so that it's whole grain or whatever. What ends up happening is if you subtract 36 and you take away the 1 gram of fiber, you're left with 35 net grams of carbohydrates. And anything that's not in a single digit is definitely going to be affecting your blood sugar. That's why we always say low fat, low sugar, low calorie doesn't actually matter, because if it breaks down to sugar very quickly, because it has that high net carb content to it, that's really where the issue is. So hopefully that clears it up a little bit. So when you are looking for those few things, whether it be a protein bar or something, I have friends that look at a Lara bar, there's 17 grams of sugar. Well, that doesn't count for the rule of fives and make it any better. And it's certainly, even though it might have, 5 or 6 grams of fiber, which is great for the rule of fives, when you look at the net carb content, it's very, very high, and it's definitely in double digits. So you have to be really careful. Hopefully this helps you guys. Post questions, and I'll be happy to answer them.